Am I being contradictory to the statement that I made right here? That's a great question. So what is the difference between being an observer of your reality and only paying attention to those things that you prefer and doing something like voting in the upcoming election because you care about the world around you? I'm so glad you asked this question, so let's get into it. Let's say you watch a little kid fall off their bike and start crying and no one is around, not a single other solitary human for some weird reason in this scenario. And this kid is crying. Would you go, yeah, I don't prefer that. That's not part of my reality. I'm going to walk away and ignore it because that's not something I prefer to see, because seeing a little kid cry is sad, right? No, you wouldn't walk away from that poor little child, right? Because you have a basic sense of humanity about you. So walking over to that child is doing something to help the momentum forward of humanity. You are showing that child care and compassion and love in a moment where they need to feel supported, right? That is not saying that paying attention to that energy you don't prefer means that I'm going to accept that energy into my life, right? And I'm going to be accident prone or notice children crying all the time. No, because you're not focused on the bad of the situation. You're focused on how I can help, how I can make it better, how I can be there to support and provide for this child who fell off their bike, okay? So let's take that energy and apply it to something like voting. And remember, voting or not voting is just one way that I gave as an example of what spiritual bypassing can look like. In this previous video where this comment comes from, I explained if you say something like, I'm not going to vote in this upcoming election because I'm above that spiritually. I've gone beyond that spiritually where I don't need to be involved in the world around me. That's spiritual bypassing. I'm not saying if you choose not to vote for other reasons that you're spiritually bypassing. I'm just saying if you used your spirituality to say, I'm above all of the people around me, I don't need to vote and I don't need to participate, that's spiritual bypassing, because you can't bypass your own experience. You can't bypass your own life, right? And you did choose to have a human experience. You did, believe it or not, choose to live where you chose to live. So if you happen to choose to live in the United States at a time of great strife, but also great triumph, of great transitions, you chose to be a part of that. You're either going to choose to actively help move in a more positive direction, or you're going to choose to keep things in the status quo. And not choosing is choosing by default, because not choosing means you're not part of the movement forward. That means you are choosing to have your energy stay with the status quo. And if that's what you want, then perfect. Then don't help be part of the change, right? If you notice things about the world just as you noticed that child on the bike, right? You weren't looking for a child to fall off their bike and cry. You weren't looking for there to be a problem. If you're aware of anything at all that's going on in the world and you have an opportunity to do something that is definitely within your grasp, that you are able to do to help affect that change, that you say, no, I'm above that. I'm above all of these other people that I see. I've moved beyond that. What you're actually doing is ignoring things you already know about, right? And saying, I'm above those people. I'm elevated above them. I'm more important than those people. I'm not going to get involved in those affairs. Now, I'm not saying you have to watch the news 24/7. Also, please don't watch the news unless you want your vibration to drop and drop and drop, because that's literally all that it does. But I'm not saying you have to get so involved in politics, right? Like, I'm not a politics person, but I'm still voting because it's very, very obvious to me just by doing a very basic level of paying attention to what's going on our planet right now, that one person wants to move this country in a direction where there's more of a state control, and one person wants to move us in a direction where people have more autonomy, right? And the one with autonomy resonates with me a lot more. That's the one that I want to live in. That's the timeline that I choose. That's the reality that I choose to live in, okay? So I'm saying I want to be part of the change because I want to be in that timeline. I want to be in that reality. So it's not hyper focusing on all of the politics and all of the negative and all of the name calling and all the garbage that goes with politics, right? I'm not saying you have to hyper focus on that. I'm just saying use the knowledge you already have. And if you feel like I don't know what the knowledge I already have, it's okay to learn about things. It's okay to go, I want to learn a little bit more about this so then I can decide if I want to vote or not, or which way I want to vote or not, right? It's about learning in a way that feels good and helping out humanity. So the post that I made about this with the voting was not about politics at all. It's just about basic humanity and how can we help our neighbors and how can we help the world and how can we affect the change that I know all of you out there are so desperately wanting. If you refuse to be a part of the change, and a very easy part of that is just simply casting a vote, then you can't be a part of the change, right? If you refuse to help the kid back up off the ground and back onto their bike, then you can't experience the joy that that child has of saying, oh my gosh, this is still okay and I can still be safe. You don't get to experience the good if you aren't willing to help your neighbor. And if this is a way that you can easily help your neighbor, that is the only thing that I was asking people to consider. Just a different perspective, a different viewpoint. It's just about helping your neighbor when you're able to help and they need help, right? It's the same energy of, let's say your neighbor's grass is growing and it's like a foot freaking tall. Do you A, call the city to tell on them so the city gives them a fine or a warning or whatever it is? Or do you B, knock on their door and check on them and see if they're okay? See if they need a little bit of help. It's simply shifting your energy into a 5 density state, higher than this 3rd density that we live on now, so we can tip the scales into 5D, so we can live in a world where everything is beautiful, where we don't have things like politics. That's all. Am I being contradictory? My goodness. Am I being contradictory with this statement here that I made? That's not what I'm going to point to.